Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a landmark legal case from the Philippines that all came down to a single, really powerful question, one that forced the country's highest court to define what it actually means to be a lawyer in the modern world.
So let's start with a bit of a puzzle. Imagine a lawyer who becomes a CEO. They spend their days running a business, negotiating huge deals, shaping corporate policy, all things that really lean on their legal training. So my question to you is, are they practicing law? Well, this exact question was at the very heart of a major constitutional fight.
All right, so our story kicks off back in 1991. The job opening? Chairman of the Commission on Elections, or COMELEC. This is one of the most vital independent bodies in the entire country, and the Constitution set a very specific bar for anyone who wanted to run it.
Yeah, the 1987 Philippine Constitution is crystal clear about this. You can't just be a lawyer. You have to be a lawyer who has been actively practicing for at least a decade. This wasn't just a nice to have, it was a hard and fast rule.
So in April of '91, when Christian Monsod, a really accomplished economist, a businessman, and a lawyer, gets nominated, it immediately sets off a firestorm. Another lawyer, Cayetano, comes out swinging, arguing that Monsod, for all his qualifications, just didn't meet that 10-year practice rule. And even after Monsod was confirmed and took his oath of office, the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. This political debate had officially turned into a high-stakes legal battle, and it was headed straight for the Supreme Court.
Right. So once Monsod was officially sworn in, the whole issue landed squarely in the lap of the Supreme Court. The entire complicated dispute would now boil down to how you interpret one single crucial phrase in the Constitution. This was it. This was the fundamental question. No one was denying that Christian Monsod was a lawyer. He passed the bar way back in 1960. The real issue was whether his career in international banking and corporate management and public service actually counted as practice. And what's really interesting is that the court itself noted that there wasn't a lot of direct legal history to guide them. They were pretty much in uncharted territory.
And what this case did was bring a really fascinating debate to the surface. It revealed this deep split in how people even define what a lawyer does. You basically had a very traditional, old-school view clashing with a much more modern, expansive one.
And you can see the two sides right here. On one hand, you've got the traditional view, the lawyer we all picture from the movies, arguing in court, filing lawsuits, the classic litigator. But the modern view says, hey, wait a minute, the world has changed. It sees a lawyer as an advisor, a negotiator, a problem solver who uses their legal skills in the boardroom, not just the courtroom. Now, the justices who disagreed with the final ruling, they were firmly in this traditional camp. Justice Padilla argued that practice has to be something you do actively, habitually, all the time. A few isolated moments over a long career that happen to require legal knowledge, that just doesn't cut it. It had to be your main thing. But the court's majority saw things very differently. They argued that the legal profession has simply evolved. They even quoted a famous corporate lawyer basically saying that today, the real legal work, the counseling, the deal-making, that happens way more in an office than it does in a courtroom. Okay, so with these two competing ideas on the table, how did the Supreme Court actually go about analyzing Christian Monsod's career through this modern lens? Well, the majority went through his entire resume, piece by piece. They started with his early work in a law office. Then they pointed to his time at the World Bank, negotiating huge loans and dealing with the laws of different countries. They looked at his time as a CEO, as a consultant, and even his public service work on major national commissions. All of it, they argued, required a deep understanding and application of the law. So the court wasn't seeing these as separate jobs that were different from being a lawyer. No, they saw them as different facets of being a lawyer. He wasn't just a businessman who happened to have a law degree. He was a lawyer who was applying his legal skills in the worlds of economics, management, and even legislation. And to really justify taking this broader view, the court pulled out this powerful legal idea. Don't just follow the literal words of the law, the letter that can sometimes be too rigid, but instead embrace its intended purpose, its spirit. They basically argue that the people who wrote the Constitution never meant to freeze the definition of a lawyer in time. And get this, they used this brilliant analogy to drive the point home. The guy who was supposed to punish Samson promised Delilah he wouldn't use a blade or draw blood, and technically he kept that promise by blinding Samson with a hot iron. You see? He followed the letter of the promise, but completely violated its spirit. And the court was saying that sticking to a narrow definition of law practice would do the exact same thing to the Constitution's real intent. So, with their reasoning all laid out, the court was finally ready to deliver its verdict. And in doing so, it was about to set a precedent that would echo for decades. And the final decision was petition dismissed. The court ruled that the commission that confirmed Monsod had acted properly. And just like that, his appointment as chairman of the Comelec was officially and finally upheld. But you have to look at these numbers, because this was anything but a unanimous decision. It was incredibly close. You had 5 justices voting to dismiss the case, sure, but you had 4 who strongly dissented, and another 2 who agreed with the final result, but not necessarily with all the reasoning behind it. This really just shows you how deeply divided the court was on this whole issue.
So what's the big takeaway here? What's the lasting legacy of this case? Well, Cayetano versus Monsod officially established a very broad, very modern, and liberal definition of what it means to practice law in the Philippines. As you can see, it's not just about arguing in courtrooms anymore. It's now defined as any activity that requires the application of legal knowledge, training, and skill.
And this decision really leaves us with a provocative thought about the nature of law itself. I mean, this case wasn't just about one man's job qualifications. It was a fundamental debate about evolution versus tradition, and it forces all of us to ask, when should our legal systems stick to the old ways, and when do they have to adapt to a world that's constantly changing?